Are you imagining that crime has gotten significantly worse in the last 10 years under this liberal government? Actually, no, you're not imagining it. And I'm going to go over some recent crime statistics that were released from Statistics Canada. Let's get into it, shall we? All right, so Statistics Canada recently released the statistics for 2023 in conjunction, I might add, with a additional gun ban that they decided to drop on us. And of course, they used some of the statistics in here as justification for why the gun bans were working, even though they're actually not. And we'll get into that as well. So the first chart I'm going to put up is the total violent criminal code violations. And I started the charts in 2005 because Prime Minister Stephen Harper and the Conservatives, they started in 2006 and they were done partway through 2015. So I wanted to show what happened to crime under Harper and what happened to crime under the Liberals. Now, obviously, and I'll get into this towards the end, it's not all the reduction in crime under Harper is going to be attributed to things that the Conservatives did, but I will say that they certainly didn't do anything to exacerbate the crime, and that's important. And we'll talk about what the Liberals have done to exacerbate crime in Canada in the last 10 years towards the end of the video. So, you can see that over the course of about the last 10 years, that violent crime has gone up approximately 33%. And you can see it was actually declining at about the same rate it increased under the Liberals. It declined the same amount under Harper. Now, you might think that that's not that bad. It's only a 33% increase. But you'll see when I get into the individual crime statistics that some of them are actually quite bad and are very concerning. So assault level 2, which is using a weapon or causing bodily harm, it went from about 125. These are all per 100,000 population, by the way. It went from 125 per 100,000 to about 215. So that's, without doing the exact math, that's probably about a 90% increase in assaults. And that's adjusted per capita. I know that the population of Canada has grown significantly in the last 10 years, and we are taking that into account in these charts. Okay, the next one, and this is a big one here, total firearms, use of, discharge, and pointing. You can see that it was trending pretty much sideways under Harper, and it was about 5 per 100,000 population, and now it's currently at about 12.5 per 100,000 population. So over a 200% increase in the last 10 years. Now remember that during this 10-year period, in fact, over about the last 5-year period, we've had multiple gun bans on licensed gun owners. Do they appear to be working? I don't think so. It looks like they've had no effect on gun crime whatsoever. Let's go to the next chart. Weapons trafficking and manufacturing. Once again, this pretty much went sideways under Harper. It actually went up for a little bit and then down. And this is the type of thing that you'd expect to see. Not all crime trends are going to be the same across all years. You can see it went up a little bit under Harper and then it declined. In fact, went from 0.3 per 100,000. It peaked under Harper at close to 0.5 per 100,000. And then when Harper left office in 2015, it was back to about 0.3 per 100,000. Then something happened. The Liberals got in. They changed some laws. I can't remember the specific bill, but they reduced some of the sentencing on gun smuggling and things like that. And there's been a huge increase in weapons trafficking over that time period. It appears that it went from a low in 2016. So it actually went down for 1 year under Trudeau and the Liberals. It looks like it went from about 2.5 in 2016 up to 0.7. So that's almost a 300% increase from the low till today. The next one on our list is homicide. Now, this was the one that they touted when they passed the most recent gun ban, which was the last 173 or so guns that they've banned. I think all in all, it's well over 2,000 now. And these are for licensed gun owners. As you saw, it doesn't affect the smuggled guns coming in from the United States or illegally manufactured guns. It just affects law-abiding citizens like myself and takes away our property. But you'll notice here in the homicide chart that for some reason there's a drop from 2022 to 2023. Now, I don't really know what to say about this. You'll notice that homicide did trend down under Harper and reached a low, it looks like in 2013, and then it's been trending upwards steadily ever since. I don't know if the drop in 2023 is some sort of anomaly. There was a bill C-48 that passed, I believe it passed in 2024, and it has some reverse onus provisions for repeat violent offenders. It may actually have a positive impact on crime in the future, but that obviously did not affect the 2023 statistics. So I don't know if it's an anomaly or it could potentially be data tampering by the Liberals, because this downward spike in homicides does not correlate with any of the other charts. All the other charts are either flat or up from 2022 to 2023. And like I said, they announced the decrease in homicides with another gun ban on law-abiding gun owners. And they basically used the homicide rate dropping as the justification for why the previous gun bans, were working. All right, the last chart, and one of the most concerning, is sexual assault level 2, weapon or bodily harm. And you can see that during Harper, it was mostly a sideways trend, with the absolute low slightly below 1 per 100,000 population in 2014. And then since then, it's pretty much been an upward trend. And now we are almost double, looks like about 1.8 per 100,000. So from 0.9 to 1.8 per 100,000. That's an increase of about 100% in sexual assaults in just under 10 years. The next chart you can actually find on Stats Canada website, and it is a crime severity index going back to 1998. And you can see for violent crimes that the last time we saw violent crime rates that were about the same as they are today, and they might be higher now, we don't actually know. This chart does include 2023, but it doesn't include 2024. But you can see that it was about 2006 or so that violent crime was about as high as it is today. And it went down all throughout the Conservatives' time in power. And then starting in about 2014 or so, it bottomed out and went up. I didn't want to be doing too many charts and spending too long analyzing the data, but I just wanted to give a brief overview of some other categories. So this is from Statistics Canada and was originally posted by a guy on X called Concerned Canadian, and it appears that homicide is up about 33% in the last 10 years. Auto theft is up 39%. Theft over 5,000 is up 49%. Identity theft up 121%. Firearms crimes up 136% in the last 10 years. Child sexual abuse up 141% in the last 10 years. That's a big deal. Human trafficking, also a big deal, up 210% in the last 10 years. And extortion, this is another one that doesn't necessarily show up in the violent crime statistics. Extortion is up 429% in the last 10 years. And child pornography up 565% in the last 10 years. So you can see that we do actually have a crime problem in Canada, and it does appear to be continuously getting worse. And just a public service announcement, I would recommend that you vote in the election, of course, and that you vote Conservative, because they were the ones pointing out this crime problem. Even several years ago, they were pointing out this crime problem, and they've pretty much had a consistent plan to deal with crime, to be tough on crime, and that they've stated years ago. Pierre Poilievre was talking about this stuff easily 2 years ago, and he's been very consistent. Now, Carney recently came out with their crime plan, and it once again appears to be a lot of copy and pasting from Pierre's crime plan. So the Liberals have decided that since they were losing so badly just a few months ago in the polls, that they would just adopt all the conservative ideas and then, pretend to be hard on Trump, and then everybody would love them. That's essentially what's going on here. I don't believe them for a second that they're going to do anything to reduce crime. They had 10 years to work on it, and all they did was increase crime. So let's talk about, why did this happen? Okay, is it specific policies that the Liberals had? Did it just happen all by itself? I'm going to try to be brief, but this is obviously a very complicated subject. The first thing I want to point out is that crime was falling probably since the 1980s. There's a number of factors for this, but one of the main factors is that young people in general are spending a lot more time on computers, playing video games, staying indoors, and not being out and about getting involved in criminal and gang activity. This particularly increased in the early 2000s with everybody jumping on the internet and, playing video games. Now, the Conservatives did implement many tougher on crime policies during that 10-year period. I'm not going to go through specifics. I think they did have an effect, but to be honest and fair, I don't think they had a huge effect on violent crime. I think a lot of it was just the trend in society for males to be less masculine and to stay inside. But what did the Liberals do that reversed this course? I think if the Liberals didn't do certain things, I think the downward trend would have perhaps leveled off and we would have hit a lower plateau level for crime. First of all, the economy under the Liberals has absolutely been horrible. I'm not going to go through all the details. Most of you are probably feeling it, but the cost of real estate and rents went through the roof, inflation went through the roof, and wages stagnated. When people have less money and they are feeling poor and they're feeling pinched and stressed over money, they are more likely to resort to crime. Another thing that happened during the Liberal time in power is that there was an explosion in immigration. This was through various programs and also just normal immigration and refugee programs. But you had the temporary foreign worker programs, you had the foreign student programs, the refugee programs, and of course, an increase in just normal immigration. This pushed up Canada's population drastically and exacerbated the housing crisis and the inflation. And at the same time, it suppressed wages because when you bring in an almost unlimited supply of unskilled labor, you prevent economic opportunities at the lower end of the wage scale. And a lot of young men, in particular, have trouble getting good entry-level jobs. And this leads to, once again, more crime. Now let's discuss individual bills that the Liberals passed in the last 10 years that exacerbated the crime problem. Several of these bills will be bills that you think were good things and that were created to address these problems, but they all contained what I consider to be poison pills, which actually prevented these bills from doing anything of value. And many of the specifics in these bills have actually been mentioned by Pierre Poilievre himself. So let's get into some of these things. Bill C-5 introduced home sentences. Bill C-5 allows some offenders to serve their sentence at home by increasing the availability of conditional sentence orders, CSOs, for certain offenses. Conditional sentences, often referred to as house arrest, are intended to serve both punitive and rehabilitative aims and are available when offenders do not pose a risk to public safety and are facing terms of imprisonment under 2 years. So this would apply to things like auto theft or shoplifting or breaking and entering when people aren't home, things that are not generally in a violent nature. But the problem is that if criminals don't really get in much trouble when they're doing minor things, they tend to get worse over time because they're not really getting punished or spending any time in jail. So that's Bill C-5. Bill C-75, and this is another big one, introduced the principle of restraint, which provides that in any bail decision, the primary consideration is to release the accused at the earliest reasonable opportunity and on the least onerous conditions. And this is why we see so many violent offenders get out sometimes the same day or the next day, and sometimes even without a bond. And then they're back out on the street committing another crime. And I would like to point out that these easy and hasty bail conditions do not seem to apply to Freedom Convoy organizers or the Coots 3, many of which, I think with the Coots 3, they were held without bail and without trial for, I believe it was over 700 days. These are people that were accused of committing mischief, conspiring to commit mischief, and in one case, conspiring to kill an RCMP officer. I believe that charge was dropped. They did get some weapons charges, but here's the point I would like to make about that. Nobody was hurt in the Coots standoff. Nobody was shot, nobody was killed, nobody was raped or beaten. It was not violent, and yet these people were held without bail for 700 days plus. People that lead cultural or political movements do not seem to get the same benefits as your common violent criminal. Part of the principle of why tougher on crime policies work and why longer jail sentences work is that the criminals simply are not out in the public and able to commit crimes. If somebody commits a home invasion and they're in jail for 10 years, then they cannot commit another home invasion for 10 years. But if they're out in, let's say, 1 year, then they can commit another home invasion in 1 year. So you see that over time, there's a cumulative effect of going easy on criminals for too long. Not only do criminals do a risk assessment in their own heads as to how much risk they're taking for the reward that they're receiving, but they're simply just out in the public more and able to commit more crimes. And it's the same for the light bail sentencing, because often these people are out the same day and they commit crimes sometimes the same day or the next day. Now, Bill C-48 is a bill that was passed last year that brought in what is called the reverse onus, which means that certain violent offenders will now have to prove that they're not dangerous before they can get out on bail. But the problem here is, and this applies to Bill C-5 and Bill C-75 as well, the problem is that there are provisions in these bills to treat Indigenous and other minority groups differently than everybody else. In other words, they're treated less harshly than, I guess, straight white males, because who isn't a minority, right? So these bills, although nobody wants to talk about this, are in and of themselves basically racist. And these provisions don't actually work because when you treat the minority groups less harshly and they're not in jail as long, or they get out on bail quicker, they're back on the street to commit crimes even more frequently. So the intent of these provisions is to reduce what these woke lefties think is overrepresentation. It's not overrepresentation. Certain groups do commit more crimes. That's a fact. But they're trying to address the overrepresentation by handing out easier bail conditions and lighter sentencing, but then those criminals are out on the street to recommit and reoffend even sooner. So it's actually having the reverse effect that the liberals are intended. Talk about stupid. So as you can tell, I get a little bit heated on this stuff because it's just so idiotic. And I'm just going to reiterate, there is only one party that will, at least to some extent, address this crime problem. I do not trust the liberals. I know Carney added some tougher on crime provisions into his platform to imitate the conservatives so that he can get the people in the middle. I get that. He just copies basically everything the conservatives do. But I don't believe that they are going to implement these properly. They are going to leave in these poison pill type of provisions, and nothing is going to change. I think that Pierre Poilievre and the conservatives will actually deliver, and if these criminals are put in jail for very long periods of time, not unfairly, remember we're talking about people with, it's like a 3 strikes rule. You commit 3 violent crimes, you go to jail for a very long time. You have a chance to change your behavior after the first and the second times you commit a violent crime. But after the 3rd time, you go to jail for a very long time. And then you're not out in the community and able to commit crime. Now, I know that people are going to say, well, the reoffense rate is still very high. Maybe when they get out, but if they're not out for 20 years, they can't commit crimes for 20 years. Another objection would be, well, it's going to cost a lot of money to keep these people in jail. What do you think the cost is to society of these people continuously reoffending? I guarantee you it's higher than keeping them in jail. And on jails, they don't have to be as nice as they are. We can get rid of a lot of the conveniences and a lot of the luxuries that these modern jails have. I don't think that inmates need to have continuous access to the internet and television and all of these things. I think they could just, maybe take school and read books. Maybe that would help them. So anyways, if you care about Canada, please vote Conservative. And if you like this video, like and subscribe, and please share. I'm always looking to build my audience. I'm trying to deliver information backed by receipts, and I think I'm doing a fairly good job of it. Until next time, take care, guys.